Hello, everyone, and welcome to Racism in the Workplace, a conversation on what we can do to move forward. Would love to make sure that folks in the audience, which we have over 250 folks here so far, I think more are coming in, just give us a hey and hello in the chat. There is a public chat that we have here going, and it's great to just make sure you can hear me and see me. Wonderful. I actually see some familiar names already. Super excited to be here with you all. So I'm just curious, first of all, well, for those of you who haven't met me, my name is Emily Missner, and I am the founder and CEO of FindSpark. And I'm going to share a quick poll in the chat. I would love to know if you are a returner or if this is your first time. Let's see, I'm going to share that poll right now. So always curious, how many of you, is this your first time event or a returner? All right, so we have a lot of first time FindSpark attendees, but a good number of returners as well. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to share a bit about FindSpark before I pass things off to our incredible group of speakers. So FindSpark is all about setting up diverse early career professionals for career success and connecting employers to top diverse early career talent. And we have been dedicated to creating an incredibly inclusive community, inclusive programs and resources since our start around 2011. And we are really happy to play a part in being able to use our platform now that conversations around race have been more of a national conversation. We're really happy to be able to use our platform to share voices of folks within our community. And so we can all be a part of being a positive influence in helping create a more equitable workforce for Black professionals and other underserved folks. So a few numbers about FindSpark. We have over 33,000 members. We have over 500 different schools represented, and we have hosted hundreds of programs since we started in 2011, both online and offline. And we, like many other companies and organizations, have moved at least through the end of the year to doing all online programs, but we're still very excited to continue to connect our members and our employers to each other and to share networking opportunities in any way we can through this really challenging time. These are just a few of the really amazing employers and partners who we work with to create programs and resources throughout the year for our community members. And we're really excited to have one of our longtime employer partners here as a speaker. And before we jump in, I do just want to share a little bit about my background, especially since so many of you are new to the FindSpark community. So when I was a college student myself, I found that there really was a lack of career resources and networking advice for students and recent grads, especially folks who are interested in creative fields or just industries and fields that don't have as much of a structured path as some others do. And so what I really truly wanted to do was help make sure that people realize how important it is to create a really, really strong network for yourself early on in your career. And so what we've been doing is creating programs and resources that are really fun, really inclusive to help our community members gain those skills to be able to get to that next career goal that they might have. So in addition to running FindSpark, I'm also an adjunct professor. I teach career and social media courses at School of Visual Arts and FIT in New York. I have my undergrad from Hofstra University, and I have my certificate in diversity and inclusion from Cornell. And now that I've introduced myself, I would love if everyone can take a moment to introduce themselves, if you haven't already, if you can share your name, your role, company, or industry. Obviously, there are a lot of people transitioning and out of work right now, so you're welcome and encouraged to include that as well and what you might be looking for next. There's a lot of great people in the audience here. It's always great to hear where folks are tuning in from. We started in New York, but FindSpark is a national community, and I know we have folks tuning in from all over. And you can also share a link where people can connect with you. If you've noticed, if you include that HTTP www info in that link, it is easily clickable, so you can all connect with each other as well. And I'm going to share another quick poll in the audience right now. I would love to know what best describes you in terms of what type of professional you are. So are you a student, early career professional within the hiring space, within the DE&I space, or a higher education professional? And now, a reason that I ask this is a really great and exciting event for us. And something to know about FindSpark is really there's three main parts of our community. We have our students, our recent grads, our early career professionals, the job seekers, the people coming to our programs and enjoying our resources to grow their career. That's one. We have our employers and our partners who are working with us to connect with those members. And then we also have our higher ed professionals like adjunct professors and career center pros who share our resources with their students and alumni. And up until now, we've created lots and lots of resources for all three of those groups, but we've always done it, for a particular group, right? Something for employers, something for the job seekers or the higher ed pros. And this was really the first time that we created a program where our intention was to, and is, and we're excited to see, invite folks from all of these different aspects from within our community to take part in this conversation, because we all need to be a part of creating positive change to create a more equitable workplace for
Hey folks, I just heard my mic is off, so I am back and just about wrapping up, so don't worry, you didn't miss too much. So if you're going to share on social media, use our hashtag, tag us. I will be sharing resources and moderating in the chat, and we again will save questions or save time for Q&A at the end. And if you do have questions, I encourage you to direct them at specific speakers if you can, but if not, I'll help do that also. And with that, I am really excited to introduce our speakers. The format of today's event will be each speaker will be interviewed by another speaker and then interview another speaker. We are really excited about this format to give everybody a chance to go in depth into their expertise and their experiences and advice. Everyone who's speaking today has been involved in the FindSpark community in some way or shape or form in the past. I do want to give a special shout out to Quintrell, one of our first speakers whose name might sound a little newer than the others, and that's because he graciously stepped in to cover for one of our other speakers who was unable to attend last minute. Phil, but we are really excited to have his expertise as well. And our other first speaker is Franklin Reed, who I, of course, want to give a really special shout out because we have been working with his company where he's at, Tech Systems, for a really, really long time, many years, and I'm really thrilled to be able to have him here to share his expertise as well. So with that, I would love to get a digital round of applause and a let's go, or maybe a clapping emoji, and to welcome our first speakers on screen. So take it away, guys.
Me out there, can I get like a thumbs up or anything in the chat? Ready to rock and roll? All right, we're ready to go. Well, guys, I'm super excited. My name is Quintrell Lenore. I get the privilege to get things kick-started. Man, I'm super excited about this event. It's unfortunate that my buddy Phil can't join us, but I'm glad to be a part of this opportunity. So I get to introduce our first speaker here, Franklin. So without further ado, let's sort of rock and roll here. Franklin, would you mind just giving us a brief introduction, telling the folks who you are, a little bit about your background and the work that you do?
you hear me? Test 1 2.
I think he's trying to get his audio set up here.
Can you hear me? Test 1 2 3. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Test 1 2 3. 1 2 3. What's going on? 1 2 3. Test. Can you hear me? You can hear me. Okay, so you can't hear me. Okay, cool. All righty, I see all the yeses there. Technology, you gotta love it. I did hear your question, so I am prepared to answer you. So as both Emily and Quintrell said, my name is Franklin Reed, and I have the incredible honor today of serving as the Director of Inclusion and Diversity with Tech Systems. And Tech Systems is a full stack technology and talent services organization. For the first 14 years or so in my career, I started in a business development role where I was customer facing. I was selling our services to our customers. And roughly 5.5 or so years ago, I made the decision to pivot my career. Tech Systems has been really good to me, provided me with incredible opportunity, and I wanted to have the kind of impact that the company had on me. I wanted to be able to replicate that with individuals who not only look like me, but certainly who came from diverse backgrounds. And so I made the decision to pivot my career in diversity and inclusion. And for the last 5+ years, I've been on this incredible journey myself, but also I've had the privilege of guiding the organization as the executive leader of driving diversity within our company.
Perfect. I had some tech issues myself. I just caught the last end, but I'll transition to the next question. Thanks for leading there, Franklin.
No problem.
Just to follow up, how do we get buy-in from C-suite executives in regards to addressing diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, this is one of those questions that is definitely, I honor people who ask the question. But for people who've been in this space like myself for even a little while, 5+ years, it is one of those questions where you kind of scratch your head and you're like, man, we're still trying to convince people, we're still trying to convince them that a diverse workforce is valuable and that an inclusive culture is valuable. But it still is a question that we get, and I know it's going to be a question that many that are watching are going to have. So I think that in order to get buy-in, there are 2 tracks that a diversity and inclusion practitioner has to run on. The first track is changing hearts and minds, absolutely. But the second track is processes, systems that support the kind of change that you're trying to drive. Just like if you think societally, we think about the change in racial equality that has happened over 400 years. 2 things have happened. We've had people who have awakened to understanding the devastating impact that racial inequality has. And so their hearts have become alive. And then you've also had the corresponding legislation that has had to be enacted to ensure that the change is maintained. And I think in order for organizations, in order for us as D&I practitioners to get buy-in, we have to do those 2 things. But the other thing that's really important, which unfortunately many D&I leaders don't focus on, or even councils, D&I councils don't focus on, is you have to connect to the thing that's the most important to the C-suite, which is driving profitability or maximizing the output of your talent. And those are the 2 things. If you speak that language, it's very hard for them to not convince C-suite leaders to exercise the kind of buy-in that you need.
Wow, I think you made a good point. You pretty much making a business case for all of our challenges within a workplace. Diversity and inclusion is going to touch all of our organizations, but in order to influence those that are in those leadership positions, connecting the needs right from the D&I point, but making that business case to serve those needs.
Absolutely. Yeah, the business case is absolutely critical. And although sometimes that might feel yucky, to some folks that, shouldn't it just be, because we think it's the right thing to do? And the answer is yes. But the answer is also yes, that you want to connect to the overall objectives of your business.
For sure. Well, kind of a similar question here. So with your experience, you're highly trained within this D&I space as a professional, but as a leader that's helping to impact change. For you personally, what methods do you use to continue to learn in order to keep up with the field as well as your own personal professional development?
Man, good question. Highly trained. Wow, that's questionable. We'll have to talk about that. No, just kidding. I think what we have to think about as we talk about learning and keeping your saw sharpened is often we label the work that we do as diversity, equity, and inclusion. But really what we're talking about is organizational, behavioral, systems management, change management. And, I know we research and we learn about different subjects like microaggressions and privilege and white privilege and unconscious bias. And all those things are absolutely important and those things are critical. But in order for us to be really effective and to be a holistic professional that's going to drive real change, we also have to read and research and learn about subjects like change management systems and behavioral sciences. And because at the end of the day, that's what we're addressing. And to the degree that we lean into those particular areas is the degree that we're going to not only be successful, but as a practitioner is the degree of the value that we're going to bring. And so for me, I try to open myself up to a lot of different topics and subjects. And so, I sign up for a lot of articles and podcasts and, I read books along the lines of the subjects that I just mentioned. But I also have a group of, I like to call them the experts. I don't necessarily identify myself as an expert, but I listen to folks like Doctors Ed and Myra Hubbard, who are the foremost authority on diversity return on investment. Howard Ross and Mary Frances Winters and Jennifer Brown. And I probably have 25 different podcasts that I subscribe to. And while some of them, you'll look at them and it'll say diversity and inclusion, there are others that is just, politics and it's, travel. Because you never know where the learning moment is going to happen, but you also never know when you're going to need to reference something you've learned. But if we keep our focus really narrow, then we also, not that you don't go deep in areas, but you want to be as effective as possible. And so you want to open yourself up. And so I open myself up to as much as possible.
Up on that, it sounds like challenging yourself to be a lifelong learner. To be resourceful and to help people. And you referenced this in the first question, being empathetic. None of us are, subject matter experts to overcoming systemic racism and, issues like this. But the big thing, in order for us to work together in our diverse workplaces, challenging ourselves to get skilled and get tooled up and to do the work and put ourselves in positions to learn. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, let me just say this. It's no different for me than when I was in business development. I had to become an expert in the product, but I also had to learn how to build trust. I also had to learn how to make connections. I also had to learn the industry that I was supporting. And so if we stay narrow, we really limit our ability to have the kind of impact that we want to have.
For sure. And I'm going to ask a similar question. So you have a wide range of experience, and the question is geared towards have you sort of seen improvements in addressing racism within the work that you do? But I'm gonna also add this because you referenced this. Do you see sort of improvements and any differences based on the types of industries that are out there?
So yes, there has been improvement and there has been progress. Absolutely, over my 45 years of life, for sure. But I don't think the progress that we've seen today matches the level of energy or investments that we've made. We've seen organizations lean into racial inequities to a point. We've seen discussions on the issue. We've seen, more people talking about it today than ever before. And we've seen organizations elevate and individuals into DEI roles, but we haven't seen the kind of behavioral or representation change that we all believe we want to see. And so, yes, I'd be lying if I didn't say there was some progress, but I don't think anybody that's watching this, including you or I, would sit back on our laurels and say that there isn't a tremendous amount of work that has to be done. And we'd like to see it start to match the level of investment and energy that so many people are starting to put into this work.
For sure. Yeah. And, I kind of picked up on, we're certainly we can get energized by seeing the positive changes, but it is very discouraging on the flip side, knowing that there's so much more work that can and should be done.
Yeah.
And you kind of referenced this. It's not a select group of folks. It's not just your D&I officer. It's not just your executives. We all have to do that heavy lifting, which, it can be discouraging at times. Just to sort of wrap things up here, in regards to seeing that change, in your mind, are there any positive indicators that you've seen that maybe we're turning the corner and in addressing racism within a corporate setting?
Yeah, I definitely think there's some positive indicators. And I do realize I'll take 10 seconds to answer your second question before, which is industries where we're seeing progress. Work has to be done across every industry and across every sector. So I don't want to let any industry or sector or company off the hook. Work has to be done. So positive indicators. Yeah, I do think there are positive indicators because I think that more people today, even with the level of discomfort that comes with having conversations around topics like race, it's happening in the workplace more and more today. And I came from a generation, and certainly my parents' generation, where you had those kitchen conversations and you had the backyard and the barbershop conversations, right, but you didn't bring it to the workplace. And I am seeing more and more organizations, including my own, that's willing to explore and to create space to have these kinds of conversations. And so that is a very positive indicator that corporate America is leaning into this.
That's a good point. I think it's kind of like the metaphor of seeing that veil being removed. It's hard, man. Whenever you talk about, the hearts of us as people, and we are what make organizations thrive, but we also are what make organizations very vulnerable. And so you just kind of referenced it, like those conversations that we might have in our family circles that we're most comfortable with. We're slowly, but yet still apprehensive to have them at work. They say don't talk about politics or religion at work, but that D&I space that really falls into that cup as well. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, you can't ask me to bring my whole self to work, but leave that part of who I am at the door. It's not fair.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Awesome. Well, Franklin, I really appreciate your feedback, your expertise here. I know you don't like to call yourself an expert, but we appreciate you and your transparency and sharing with us. And we'll transition to our next interviewer, if you will. I believe yourself and Naya are taking the lead.
Yeah. Thank you, man. I really appreciate it. Let's get Naya in here. All righty.
Hi, can everyone hear me okay?
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am good. Although I was really excited to share from my perspective, I'm gonna, be honest here. I am even more excited to have this conversation with you. When we had a chance to connect to prepare for this conversation, I was so intrigued and enlightened by that conversation. And I'm really happy that people will get a chance to hear from you. I know I cannot justifiably introduce you. So I'm going to let you do that yourself. There's no way to highlight all the work that you've been doing. And so, but I do want to set up your introduction and then lead into a further exploration on the kind of work that you've been doing. When you and I talked, you really introduced me to your work, which has such a unique and narrow yet critical platform for addressing racial inequity in the workplace. Can you do those two things, introduce yourself, but then also share and give us an introduction into your work?
Of course. Before we get started, I don't know if it's you or me, but I think one of our notifications are going off.
Grateful.
So I'm going to
tell you what it is. It's all the wonderful people that are sending me LinkedIn requests. So while you're doing that, I'm going to mute and try to turn that off.
Okay, got it. And hi to everybody in the chat. I can see people saying hi. So hello. So my introduction to this work. I really got involved in diversity and inclusion in high school. So I went to the same school for middle school and high school. And I remember returning in 9th grade and we didn't have a director of diversity and inclusion. And to me, that spoke volumes about how undervalued the work was. Because I always say if we didn't have an English teacher for the 9th grade, we would have had an English teacher by the time we came back that summer. And so I essentially at 14 kind of took it upon myself with a kind of small committee of high school teachers to really continue the conversations around diversity and inclusion in my high school. So I started attending conferences. So some people may know of it, Student Diversity Leadership Conference. So I attended that conference. I was doing a lot of workshops and seminars, really kind of just, I fell in love with the work. I felt like I was not only understanding other perspectives and understanding kind of how everyone else is moving through the world, but I really sort of better understood myself. And so I continued doing that work in college. And I think kind of the culmination of that was my senior year of college. We had a racist hate crime happen. And so many students were depleted. It was just such a depressing time on campus. And I think we throw around these words, you know, racism, diversity, inclusion. And I think sometimes we forget that there are human beings with feelings behind these words. And so many of the Black students on campus were, yes, impacted by racism, but feeling unwanted, unwelcome, unloved in a space that they were dedicating time, energy, and money to as much as other students were. And so I really collaborated with student-led organizations and different departments across campus to plan an event for every single day of Black History Month. And I was doing this while working internships and still in classes, but I really felt that it was important to create safe spaces for Black students on campus and to not just have conversations about racism, because the value of any marginalized group is so much greater than their ability to overcome adversity. And so I really wanted spaces where we could celebrate our culture, where we could reflect, where we could heal. And so that was sort of the lens that I took, and that's sort of kind of how I got into the
days
work.
Of events you planned?
Yes, and some days had multiple events, so it was more than 28. So yes,
like a boss, for real. Love it. Okay, so share with us your current role, and talk to us about how it's showing up for you now.
Yeah. So in my current role, I am a global recruiter at SendWave, which is a fintech startup. And so obviously diversity and inclusion is part of recruiting. My job is to advertise our opportunities in spaces that are going to attract a diverse set of candidates so that we can build diverse pipelines and increase diversity in the organization. So that's sort of how it's directly involved. But again, I was introduced to this work in high school. And when you're a kid, everybody wants everything to be fun for you. So when I was introduced to diversity and inclusion, we were learning about ability by taking personality quizzes and having really deep conversations, but making sure to kind of insert humor along the way. And that's still an approach that I love to take. So right now at my current organization, I implemented 2 weeks into joining something we've called discos. And it's called discos because it sounds fun. So that was very much intentional, but it's
Wait, have you ever been to a disco?
But it's
That's okay.
I haven't been to a disco.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
But but the inspiration, it's still, it's still there. So it stands for diversity and inclusion, socials, conversations, and other opportunities. And so really it is an opportunity to kind of merge self-care and celebration into conversations about diversity and inclusion. And I think that, again, is incredibly important because, it's not typically a part of the conversation, but it's something we need to think about it. Diversity and inclusion is a part of everything. And again, we're talking about all of these big words, but we are all human beings. And so I think sometimes it's really important to go beyond just kind of thinking about people's identities and the different groups that they fit into, and how do we really come to the table as human beings and remember who we are and how wonderful we are, and celebrate that as well. Yes, we need to have conversations about power and privilege and how that shows up and interacts with your identities. All of that is incredibly significant, and I don't want to discount it. It's a part of the work that I've done and continue to do as well. But I really think that, especially for me as a Black woman, I feel like so many conversations I had early on were disempowering. I left the room being reminded of all of the ways in which I lacked privilege, all of the ways in which I was oppressed, and again, felt that really my value only came from my ability to fight oppression. And so this lens now with Discos, we've celebrated Mental Health Awareness Month, we've celebrated Pride Month, and really these are conversations for people to show up and engage and feel empowered and celebrate themselves and each other. And so that's kind of the perspective and lens that I take when doing this work.
Which is absolutely phenomenal, because before you and I had a chance to talk, I've thought about these different areas more in silos, but the fact that you created this intersection and injected the fun that's absolutely needed in this conversation today is remarkable. It is very nuanced. Mm-hmm. And so I am curious what you have found to be the benefits of this, and I'm gonna call it a non-traditional approach, but I think you're starting a new tradition for us. But what have you found to be as the benefits of this approach?
Yeah, I think I'll use an analogy. As a kid, I used to volunteer all the time at the New York City Marathon. My grandfather lived right outside of one of the stopping points. And so it was a tradition every November, we go to my grandfather's house and we're standing outside and we hand out water. And I think that, we would hand out water, and my grandfather's a really silly guy. So we would dance, and really our goal was not just to give water, but to get people to smile and laugh. And so I think that's kind of my role in diversity and inclusion is to give the water, to replenish. I think that fighting racism is a long marathon. We all know this. Our ancestors were fighting this. We are fighting it. And I'm certain that people will be fighting this after us. And so I think it's really important to remind people that rest is a part of that. That you need to be replenished. And part of that is taking care of yourself. It's giving yourself that water or allowing people to give it to you because you're not going to make it to the end without that. And so what I've really seen is, I think, one, when you teach people how to replenish themselves, you are making it easier for them to extend grace and compassion to others. It's a lot harder to give to people when you feel empty. So if I'm able to give you water, if you've just filled up your bottle back there at that last station, if you see someone standing next to you that looks dehydrated, it's a lot easier for you to give that person a sip of your water than if your bottle is empty and you're like, listen, like this is not going to work for me. I got to keep it for myself. So you need to figure it out on your own. And so I think that is really, that's what I try to do. And I think also what I think about, the other way that I would compare it is kind of thinking about the intersections of our identity and how that shows up. So, if you wake up in the morning and your air conditioner is broken and you're hot and cranky, and then, you get up and your fridge is empty and you're hungry. Now you're hot and cranky and you're hungry and you're going to work and you're in a bad mood. And likely who you are that day and how you treat people that day is going to be very different from how you would interact with them if you were full, if your AC was working, if you had a nice ride to work, if everything was good. And so a lot of times who we are in any given moment is a matter of our intersecting identities, what's going on with us, and the different circumstances that are making one or more of those identities prominent for us. And so I think it's really important. I think that's why diversity and inclusion is so important. One is because when you think about how people's different identities are intersecting at any given point, you need to have different perspectives in the room. Because we're always we're always thinking from our own perspectives first and foremost. You have nothing else to go off of. And so on any given day, depending on what identities are prominent to you, it's going to be reflected. So let's say you're doing this on a day where you're a C-suite level executive and you're writing your company values. They may look very different to you on that day versus another. And so it's the same thing. A white man that's writing company values may be thinking of very different values than a Black woman would in that space, than a queer person would in that space. And so I think it's really important to consider that. But I think it's also why you need to teach people to take care of themselves. Because when you are able to address you and who you are and how you show up, that awareness allows you to move from this space of me to we. And so I really feel like self-care is the first step to collective care, because until you understand who you are and deal with who you are, you really don't understand how to deal with other people in effective ways. I
told y'all were gonna be impressed. I told you that is phenomenal. First of all, you are an outstanding storyteller, and and the fact that you have found a way to overlay your passion for self-care and well-being into this work is missing. And for the individuals who feel like you can only do this work if your title is, you've got diversity, equity, and inclusion behind your name, you've just debunked that. And you've just now empowered and enlisted a ton of folks into this work. So Naya, thank you so much. What a phenomenal interview, and I am confident we will be hearing your voice a lot more.
Thank you. And again, it ultimately is exactly what you said. This is everyone's work, regardless of your title, regardless of your level in an organization. It's going to take all of us doing the individual work and the collective work to move the conversation.
Well, I'll let you take it away to our next guest.
Yes. So Quintrell, if you'd like to come back.
Hey, Naya.
Hi. How are you?
All right. Yes, you did an awesome job. You had me smiling and like aha moments over here. Like that was awesome. I appreciate you.
Thank you. And I'm looking forward to having some of those aha moments with you as well. I really enjoyed our conversation yesterday. And we definitely have some common interests, but before we get into all of that, I would love to just start with you sort of sharing more about what it is that you do and how you uncovered that passion.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll be honest and transparent with you. When, stepping in for my buddy Phil here, I was like, man, what value could I bring to, the diversity and inclusion work that's going on across industry? So definitely overcoming that imposter syndrome. But I definitely know that we all are sort of in these conversations together. But just a little bit about me. I work at Virginia Commonwealth University in our career services office, and as the assistant director for employer and experiential development. Pretty much I help facilitate an on-campus recruiting program. We have thousands of employer partners, both locally within the Richmond area, but nationally and actually, internationally with some organizations looking to recruit our students on campus. My background prior to working at VCU has been, I'm sort of a career changer. So I've worked as a career advisor, and I've also worked as an academic advisor. So still under that student development, sort of student success umbrella, helping students pretty much grow, transition through the university and become successful. Prior to that, my background is athletics. You can't see on screen, but I'm a big dude. I weigh about 270 pounds. I play sports. So my career sort of journey all sort of started from my experience in athletics. And so playing football at JMU for my undergrad, I was sort of is just exposed to sports performance and strength and conditioning. And then from there, I've transitioned into the student development because I was mostly interested in not necessarily teaching somebody how to do an exercise, but developing those lifelong skills. So that's sort of transition to where I am now, where I help students, but it's kind of behind the scenes, helping them get the jobs that they want in order to grow. And so obviously my world of work rests within the higher education industry, where, you know, obviously diversity and inclusion touches in a variety of different ways. So yeah, that's just a little bit about myself.
Yeah. And you're an entrepreneur, right? So I'd love for you to kind of talk about
Sure.
what that's been
Yeah,
like as well.
yeah. So my wife and I, we have a career coaching company. It's called Lenore Coaching. And so it really, honestly, it started out of us, you know, needing to bring in some more income, right? So trying to develop streams. But in my world of work in employer development, I see so many different types of business models. And so my entrepreneur interest just naturally just kind of came about by seeing so many different organizations and companies, you know, facilitate their human resource needs. But I was like, you know, how can I start a company of my own with, you know, the knowledge, skills, and abilities that I've sort of acquired. So my wife and I, we sort of brainstormed and started our career coaching company. And initially I thought that, you know, when it comes to, you know, career support, that it was just unique to students. But, you know, when we talk to our friends and family members and folks that are part of our church communities, it's really the same career needs that we all have. And so we just flipped a business into career coaching based off based off the experiences that we had in higher ed.
Yeah, that's awesome. And what you just said is so true. But I'm curious for a second. I'd love to dive more into the entrepreneurship piece. I'm also an aspiring entrepreneur, so it's a little selfish. But you know, when I mentioned before, I used to go to conferences, and I remember at a conference once hearing that oftentimes Black people in particular feel that they have to be crabs in a barrel. So, you know, kind of tearing each other down for one of us to get to the top. And when we initially spoke about you starting your business, something you said really resonated with me. You said there's enough for everybody.
It is.
We can all do this. And so I'm curious, you know, you just spoke about imposter syndrome as well. So how did you kind of, you know, push past that imposter syndrome and claim your seat at the table?
For sure. So Franklin mentioned, you know, I think with his story of being a lifelong learner. So by no means am I a reader. I read what I have to read, but I can definitely resonate with being a learner. And so with that, I think what's encouraged me to realize like, hey, I can be an entrepreneur, even though that, you know, I might not have that subject matter expertise in business. What I've realized is put myself in a position to learn, to be around people that are smarter than myself, that are a little bit further than myself. And so that's really the trick, to be honest with you, for me personally, overcoming imposter syndrome. And so, you know, my wife and I are still brainstorming different business ideas, but I think it's just realizing like I don't have to have this finished product in my brain, and I don't have to be an expert in whatever it is that I want to do with my hands. It's just a matter of realizing like there's a need out there. I can help serve this need in, you know, the capacity that I have. But I think it's surrounding myself with folks that are of the same mind, same, you know, energy, same spirit to help me be encouraged to achieve my goals.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I'm curious. I'm curious to know, kind of in the process, as you're finding people to surround yourself with, have you in particular looked for people that are Black entrepreneurs, or are you looking for people that have business acumen? Sort of who is it that you're surrounding yourself with? And then how have you also found
For sure.
them?
It's interesting. So I have a bunch of informal mentors. They have no clue that they're my mentor, but they're my mentor. And so I think it's from different areas. I'm a guy, to make sense of my life, I sort of slice my life in different parts. And so I have people that I find that, and for me to do something new like entrepreneurship, I need more like that confidence and clarity. So I don't necessarily need somebody with the expertise in that specific business that I'm going in. And this specifically is career coaching. So I don't need a mentor in that regard, but I need somebody that's going to pour in some life wisdom. So I definitely have folks in my church community that fit that mold. I have friends that, you know, even though I've geographically moved, we still are in touch frequently. So I give that as an example of like there's folks that I can glean wisdom from via YouTube, via podcast that have no clue that I'm pulling from them. But for me personally, I need sort of some support for my confidence and just my well-being as a person. So I have those folks that I meet more readily with. Again, those are folks a part of my church community, friends, family that help encourage me.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think what you said right there is so important too, is that mentorship really can come from anyone and anywhere, that it doesn't just have to, I think oftentimes, and I used to be a peer career coach at my college at one point. And oftentimes people feel like it has to be somebody that's in the industry that I'm in and representing brands that I know. And it's so much simpler than that. And it doesn't even need to be the CEO or the vice president. You can really learn from anyone in any space. So that's awesome. My last question for you as we wrap up, again, because I really do think that career coaching is so valuable, but it's so underutilized, particularly within the Black community. So I'd love, if you don't mind, to kind of give us some general tips and tricks before we kind of close out.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that too, because you reference like the intersections, and I'll talk on this. Like, so, you know, I'm a Black male, I'm a man, I am a Christian, I'm a husband, I am a father. So I have a lot of different identities that sort of have different forces on me and how I behave in different regards. So in regards to career coaching, it's funny because like, I think like we all need it, like no matter what stage of our careers. And so my wife and I come from a student developmental background, meaning no matter, like we're sort of like in this cycle, if you will. And if you think about finding a job that means value to you, that job might be different as an 18-year-old versus being 25, 35, 50, and so forth, because your life changes. So we take that sort of framework in terms of developmental career decision making. And so, you know, if our lives are constantly changing, then it's important for us to get tooled up and to learn according to what our current values are in that season of our life. So I know I said a lot, but in regards to our community, I think it's important to realize, like, you don't need to do anything on your own. Like we're made in a way that we desire community and relationship, you know, so nobody should be on an island. And so that's not just unique to our career decision making. It applies to our relationships. It applies to so many other aspects of our lives. So, you know, for my wife and I to frame up a business model and have careers within, you know, career coaching, it's all about figuring out what are people's individual needs are. So I come from a strength and conditioning background. So if I'm going to teach somebody how to do a squat, you know, I'm 6'5". I'm not going to teach the same technique to somebody that's 5'9". So their body is different. So when I think about career decision, if you're 35 years old versus a 22-year-old, I'm gonna approach your values and your interests different because you have different needs. So that's sort of our motivation or pillars behind the how when we work in that career decision making space.
Yeah, what you just said, I think it's so important. We oftentimes do not ask for help. That's not how our communities, that's not how we're brought up. You're supposed to kind of know it all. So I think that if you kind of missed anything else, I really hope that you just take what Quintrell said to heart, because we really do need to ask for help. And that help doesn't stop when you graduate college. It doesn't stop kind of at the start of your career. You're always going to need to be reevaluating and reassessing. So I think that is so critically important. So thank you so much, Quintrell, for having this conversation. I'm going to sort of welcome on the next speakers. So I'll mute and go off camera.
Hear me? I am.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you.
Perfect.
Okay, perfect. Hi, everybody. My name is Ashley J. Hobbs. I'm a producer with Essence Communications, and I am here today with Corinne L. Corbett, who is the CEO of Beauty Biz Camp, and we're just going to have a really, really great and as intricate as we can in 15 minutes conversation about the effects of onlyness and what exactly are microaggressions? So Corinne, just to jump right in, I want to kind of talk to you about, first of all, who you are, but also right after you kind of like describe who you are and your vast experience in media, just kind of jumping into what are microaggressions? Because I believe that Black people, people of color, and how Naya was saying earlier, people of intersecting identities, we've all experienced, or many of us have experienced, being othered in some sort of way, and we've kind of, tried to ignore it, right? Or we've thought that maybe we were imagining it, or whatever the case is. And so I just want to kind of jump right into microaggressions 101. But first, tell everybody your vast experience.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Corinne Corbett, and I probably am the senior most person on this call. I had a media career for more than 30 years. I worked at many of the major magazines, including Elle, Real Simple, Mode, and Heart and Soul, and Essence. And now I'm an entrepreneur. And one of the things I did while I was in magazines, I had senior editorial positions. I was an editor-in-chief, but I was also a beauty editor. So I use beauty as a catalyst for change now. And I run a consultancy and advisory where I consult with brands. I do content creation for brands and for media entities. I do education empowerment through my Beauty Biz Camp brand, where I am working with girls, young women, and now moving into post-college about how beauty and appearance impacts your career and your life, and how having a seat at the table in the industry can help change the dynamics of the industry. And I'm also a podcast host. So I think our conversation now is going to be, we've had some really fun and light. We're getting into nitty-gritty microaggressions now. And microaggressions are, the modern interpretation of it is they are verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or otherwise negative, prejudicial slights and insults toward any individual, group, particularly culturally marginalized individuals and groups.
Yeah.
And they show up in a couple of ways. They come out micro insults, statements like, "You're so articulate."
Yeah.
"You're not like other people of your race." Not like other Black people. Yeah. Mischaracterizations, like the angry Black women trope, like being accused of having an attitude or being loud. There are micro invalidations when you're confused with, all the Black people look alike, so we confuse one with another, and it doesn't matter what level you're at, this can happen to you. People give statements like, "Oh, I don't see color, I'm colorblind."
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah. I'm not racist. Oh, and I have Black friends too.
Right.
Yeah.
Those are big ones too.
And then there are micro assaults. So that's when a colleague is using, that's like, that is insensitive language is used around you. So you can really identify that. But the other two, you might not be able to. But more insidious forms of microaggressions are intentional actions that, like erasure, when people erase your actual being there, like others are taking credit for your work, or exclusion or silencing, where you're consistently being left out of meetings, whether it's a team meeting or a presentation and you're responsible for the work. Yeah. It kind of reminds me of Michelle Obama's quote, "We're living with small, tiny cuts and we're bleeding every day." It's like little things that are happening.
Yeah. And often you're trying to rationalize it in your mind because you're not entirely sure. Like, did I experience that? Did they didn't mean it that way? They couldn't have meant it that way, right? And so, that's definitely true. Like, it feels like a bunch of little tiny cuts that you keep experiencing, but you're trying to get somewhere, so you don't want to put too much time or energy into figuring that out. But I think there's there's something that's like really interesting to me when we talk about microaggressions, because when we're talking about that, we're also talking about how it affects us mentally and emotionally. You know, you don't want to get, like I said earlier, you don't want to get too deep into it because you don't want to lose your focus on what you're there for, right? Like if I just work harder, then this won't affect me. If I reach, you know, if I climb higher up the ladder, then this won't be a thing for me anymore. But then you realize that as you climb, you're still, you know, experiencing these things. And I wonder, from your experience, what are some of the ways that microaggressions and silencing affect us? Not just us mentally and emotionally, but also like our work and even our advancement in the workplace.
Okay. So it's interesting that we say the word micro, because it also has micro, you know, makes you think it's about small things.
Yeah.
But microaggressions can have a major impact on your life physically, emotionally, spiritually, and vocationally. It's not, you know, a lot of people say you just have to have a thick skin. It's not about having a thick skin, because it won't save you from the impact of microaggression, for example.
Sure.
Your self-esteem can take a nosedive. Your spiritual energy can be zapped. You can be stressed, angry, depressed. You could lose weight or gain weight. You know, some people have suicidal thoughts. And this is in instances where it's more like the erasure, the silencing, the constant microaggressions. It's not the one-off.
Yeah, right.
And the stress factor is really important, because if you think about the Black community and heart disease, stress is a contributing factor. So we can't underplay what's happening with microaggressions. It can, at work, it could impact your confidence and your ability to get the job done.
Mm-hmm.
Your communication and time management skills may just suffer. You become really sensitive about your surroundings.
Yeah.
And you start to avoid people because you just don't want to deal with it, because you don't know what they're going to say to you.
Yeah. Retreat into yourself.
Yes. Then you have intrusive thoughts that are like paralyzing you, so you can't get the work done. Like all the stuff that's going on in your mind that can happen. And if you've been a victim of erasure or silencing, you know, you lose confidence in your voice. So you stop speaking, you stop contributing to in a meaningful way at work.
Yeah.
And then you go out of your way not to be seen, because if they don't want to hear you, they don't want to see you. So you go out of your way. And that loss of confidence and your ability can result. I think it's important. One of the things we talked about when we were preparing for this is that I wanted to share this, because these are things that can derail like your career growth.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
One of the things that can happen is that you're so paralyzed in your career that you don't have the confidence to go for greater roles, for promotions, and you don't have the confidence in yourself to look for other work.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's so, I mean, it's so interesting, because I've experienced that to some degree in my career, and it has taken actually years, you know, to release some of that and be able to go, you know, for the roles that I'm actually capable of doing, because you've been beaten down so much and you don't recognize that that's what it is. But I thank you for kind of like just walking through that, because so many times people are experiencing it, but they don't realize that that's what they're experiencing. So now that you've kind of laid out how to recognize microaggressions and silencing and erasure, if someone is going through in their mind, right, someone who's watching, and they realize like, oh, wow, I think this is happening to me. What advice do you have for them if they are realizing that they're experiencing this? How do they assess it? And who should they be turning to help them kind of like get through it? Who should they be talking to at their job or even outside of their work as well?
Right. So there's a couple of things. One of the things that happens when you're experiencing microaggressions or silencing or erasure is you start to question yourself. You question whether things are true or valid. And if you're a victim of racial gaslighting, you're being told that it's your imagination. And so you start to think about that. And what's happening is that if it's consistent microaggressions, it's almost a form of bullying.
Yeah.
So, and it's about maintaining a power structure so that they try to destabilize you. Yeah. So the first thing you have to do is trust yourself. Tell yourself, I'm not crazy. This did happen.
Yeah.
This is really important. I mean, it's a little thing, but it's really, really important. You got to recognize that microaggressions have a cumulative effect if they're happening over and over again. Ask yourself, if I let this slide, what signal am I sending to the person that's the aggressor? You send. If I stay quiet, am I going to replay it in my head over and over again? Everybody has a habit of it. Yes, yeah. You have a new constant soundtrack in your life. Why did I let that go? Why did I let that go? Well, I start beating myself up for remaining silent.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it becomes the dynamics of the situations, particularly in the workplace. Who is the person that is the aggressor? Is it a colleague? Is it a supervisor? Is it a direct report? It's a supervisor. You may not be able to politically and in the company culture be able to address that person in that moment. You have to think critically about it. So you have to assess what the message the person was trying to communicate. Was it to get your cultural values? Was it, your cultural communication style? Was it your ability or your right to actually have the job and be in the job?
Yeah.
Was it your intelligence, your appearance, or something else? The other thing you have to assess is the company culture. Does this happen often? Does it happen not just to you, but to other people? Is it isolated?
Yeah.
Or does it happen with frequency?
Yeah.
So you do these things before you kind of decide what you're going to do. And based upon that, if it's a one-off, you can go and talk to the person and ask for clarification.
Yeah.
Could you say more about that? How'd you come to think of that? You could say, I know you didn't realize this, but when you said X, I felt Y. And I don't know if you can, and sometimes you can say instead, maybe if you meant this, it would have been better to say X. And you can also, depending on who the person is, challenge the stereotype. And actually, in my experience, this is what the case is. And I think that you stereotype me.
Yeah.
But, depending on the company culture, you can go to HR. But one of the things I think is really important that we talked about is that you need to not only have mentors and allies and sponsors in your organization, but you have to make an active, a conscious effort to develop relationships outside your organization, so that if it's a touchy situation and it's an ongoing situation, that you have some people that you can discuss the microaggressions with, and you can develop a plan of action.
Yeah. And I like the first strategy that you mentioned, where you said you can ask the person, hey, I just need a little bit more clarity about XYZ, because I think sometimes people are doing things and they may not realize that they're doing it, but when you bring it to their attention without necessarily accusing them, then they can correct themselves, you know what I mean? Or they realize that you realize what they said, and they're, you know what I mean? So I think that was a really great strategy. And I love also the idea of having mentors and people who are like sounding boards outside of where you work, because sometimes we get so focused on, we spend most of our time in this place, in this company, working with these people, and we forget that we can have safe spaces outside of that in order to assess what's happening inside of that. So I think that that's really great advice as well. Yeah.
And I think, depending on, so microaggressors can get defensive about, unless, they can get defensive. So when you approach them, you have to keep that in mind. They're gonna experience guilt and fear and defensiveness, and they're gonna come back and then they may avoid you because they're feeling uncomfortable about the exchange. But
right.
It shouldn't stop you from doing that. But then the people who are more insidious with it are, kind of deluding themselves that they're doing the right thing when they're torturing you, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
Subtly torturing you, like.
For sure. Yeah, I think I think that now, especially now with everything that's happening, the things that you're saying, the strategies that you're bringing forward, it's just really great because it's allowing people to become more comfortable with being more upfront about how they think, about how they feel, and having upfront conversations without it necessarily feeling like you're trying to offend one another. You know what I mean? I think that that's a really great thing. One last question before we wrap. We're in the middle of a pandemic, right? But life doesn't stop. So people are looking for work, people are interviewing, people are getting new jobs. What are a couple of the ways really quickly that someone can vet a company culture to see sort of like how people sort of maneuver and if it is a safe space for them as a minority or a person of color or someone of an intersecting identity? How can they kind of vet that company culture? Because the company is vetting you as a candidate for the position, but we should be vetting the companies that we want to work for. So what could that look like?
Absolutely, you have to vet. They're interviewing you. You interview. Do your research not only on what the company is doing business-wise, but where they stand on diversity lists, for example. Check LinkedIn. Like you can go anonymous on LinkedIn or create another profile, but check people who may have had that position before or people who haven't. See how long people are staying in the company. If there's a lot of people leaving quickly, there might be something going on that you might want to go look at Glassdoor reviews. But if you're in a particular industry, join an industry organization so that you may meet people who work there, or you can find them in the directory who worked there previously, who can give you the truth. Because sometimes when people still are there, they are not necessarily feeling free to talk about, to be honest. And also, take advantage. There's whisper networks. If something's really bad, someone's talking about it. Got you.
Thank you so much, Corinne. This is really eye-opening, and I hope that it was just, great for everybody who was watching. We're going to keep it moving. I'm going to pull myself out because Corinne, you are going to talk to Elise.
Yes, we're going to talk about onlyness now. Hi, Elise.
Hello. Can you hear me?
How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you? Well. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Right. So we're going to talk about when you're the only Black person in the room right now. So I'm going to do a little intro, but then I'd love for you to give a little bit of more history about what you do and what you do, and then we'll jump into the questions, okay? Right. Sure. So even in the year 2020, there's still many industries where Black men and women find themselves as the only person in the room. Only one in the room. Onlyness is a reality, especially in tech. Like Pamela Newkirk wrote in Diversity Inc. of $1 billion business, if the tech industry pretends the future, then the forecast at Google, LinkedIn, Facebook, and other Silicon Valley giants is uninspiring. 83% of executives in Silicon Valley are white and male, and the largest tech companies, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, and Apple, at those companies, Blacks make up between 1% and 6% of the workforce. When you are the only, you face both internal and external challenges, among them tokenism, loneliness, erasure, as well as other ways that systematic racism is showing up in your workplace. So today I'm happy to discuss this with Elise, who has 15 years of global experience and has been recognized as one of the top leaders to watch in the technology space, committed to innovation, education, as well as diversity and inclusion. So we're going to discuss meeting those challenges, effective ways to talk about race, and how one can use their only status as a catalyst to open doors. So Elise, please tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Well, thank you so much for the warm introduction. Really excited to be here. And thank you, Emily, for pulling together this awesome panel and bringing everyone together today. So honored to be here. My background is in education. along with diversity, equity, and inclusion. I spent the past 15 years partnering with leaders and companies to help them think differently about the role that diversity, equity, and inclusion plays within the workforce, workplace, and marketplace. I'm also a former collegiate student athlete and partner really closely with athletes to help them transition from the locker room to the boardroom. So, I'm really obviously passionate about diversity and inclusion and the role that it plays in creating programs and experiences that provide access to underrepresented groups so that they can do their best work within their companies. So I'm excited to be here and looking forward to digging into this topic.
So let's dig in. That's the hard question. What's the hardest part of being the only Black person in the room?
Yes, well, I do love this question and appreciate you asking it. Before I answer the question about being the only person in the room, I do want to address being a Black person before I enter the room. So really being mindful of all of the emotional burdens that take place even before you enter the workplace, right? So from, what does your hair look like? What does your makeup look like? How do you talk? All of these things that for, other groups might not even be a thing, can be emotionally taxing before you even get into the room. So some of the descriptions that you shared in your intro around being, lonely and it being taxing are all true. And it's really important, especially as a Black person, in the workforce, to be confident, be present, and really try to be vulnerable, and making those connections with individuals in your organization to tell your story. Because at the end of the day, everyone has a story. And I think as a Black professional, it's important to build your confidence to be able to share that story so that you can have others around you validate that story on a more consistent basis.
So do you feel pressure to represent your race when you're in the room?
Of course.
And what does that look like when you?
Absolutely. I mean, in the beginning of my career, it was a strong burden. It was very heavy. But what it looks like now is educating people who might not look like me on what it's like to be a Black person at work. It's also about reaching back to communities of color, to share my story, to share my experiences, to identify transferable skills that carry over from other industries into the industries that they want to go into. Because a lot of times, especially for the Black community, we're trendsetters, right? We're using the technology on a day-to-day. We're in the conversations. We're the ones, being on the forefront of fashion and so on, right? But oftentimes we're not the people that are doing the work in the technology sector for that matter. So just making sure that they have access to experiences and people and conversations that will lift them up and give them the confidence within their career. So yes, there is, there's certainly a burden. I do feel, but it's a healthy one, right? Because I feel like we all have a responsibility to lift people up and make sure that they have experiences and the confidence to tell their story and to feel like they belong in the workplace.
Okay, so we've talked about the numbers in technology, the percentages of Black people in technology. Systematic racism is one of the reasons that there's been a barrier to growth in having more Black people in tech. Why are organizations afraid to have discussions about systematic racism in the workplace, and how can we overcome them?
Yeah, I mean, it's heavy. Yeah. It's heavy. It's it's hurtful. It can be embarrassing to some leaders within organizations, whether it's in the technology sector or outside of the technology sector. I think the tragic murder of George Floyd, since killing of Breonna Taylor, I mean, the list goes on. I certainly think that has spurred
Absolutely.
a renewed conversation, right, around race. But the weight of the conversation requires full engagement of the workforce, and these conversations are painful, and it can be hard for leaders within the organization, whether they're white or a person of color, to have these conversations, to be able to advance diversity, equity, inclusion, and racial conversations within the workforce. I will say, just because it's hard doesn't mean that it doesn't need to happen. But it is going to be rooted. It's going to have to be rooted in an honest conversation and authentic conversations, and courageous ones, right? Because we're not going to be able to move the needle unless we're honest with ourselves, create those brave spaces, to have open dialogue about this particular
Okay,
topic.
so let's just talk briefly, last question. Let's talk about the importance of safe spaces and how vital allyship is. And what does effective allyship look like?
Yes, I think, this certainly been a lot of conversations around allyship and the role that allies play. A couple of things. One, to be an ally, you have to learn about people's experiences. You have to be open to getting out of your comfort zone, connecting with others who might not look like you, might not have gone to the same school as you, and so forth. And the second, to really be okay being uncomfortable, right? Because these conversations are going to be uncomfortable. They are going to force you to think differently, maybe outside of your own experiences. But more importantly, I think the action piece is even more important, right? To make sure that they are taking whatever that action looks like to them, whether it's small or large, making sure that they're taking that action. And I would say lastly, recognizing privilege and using the privilege to advance the conversations, provide access, whether it's through an introduction, and making sure that you're taking the time to listen and galvanize internal stakeholders across the organization, to create those safe spaces and brave spaces to have bold and courageous conversations.
Yeah, I think, being okay with being uncomfortable is really key. If we're going to advance this, using your privilege for the advancement of these discussions and to facilitate change really, really can make a huge difference. So
I agree.
So I'm going to jump off.
We're all in this
Yes,
together, right? I mean, we're all in this together. We're all on our own personal and professional journey as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion and race. And we have to be compassionate and kind to one another and forgiving, because that's the only way that we're going to get through this.
So we have the only way that we're going to have sustained change is if we all work together. It's not the burden of one person or race. It is a collective work together. So I'm going to jump off now, and I believe Ashley is going to join you for the next conversation.
Thank you. That went by so quickly. Thanks, Corinne. Hi, Ashley. Oh. Hi, Ashley. Yes, I can hear you.
Hi.
Great to see you.
You too. I was so enjoying you guys' conversation, but I recognize we have to speed it along. So.
I know. Sorry. I know. It went by so fast. It was great. Yeah, but I am really excited to have the opportunity to interview, have this conversation, and get everyone involved in the conversation. So before I jump in, I know we only have a few minutes. We have about 8 minutes or so, but we'll cover a lot of information in a short amount of time. So I wanted to do a quick intro about our topic.
Okay.
And welcome you. Ashley Hobbs is a producer of Essence podcast, as well as a writer and a storyteller. And we've had some amazing conversations, in advance of this talk today. And I learned a ton about your background and the role that mental health and self-care plays as a Black professional in media, and also outside of the media industry. So I just want to thank you for your vulnerability in our conversations, and I hope that it comes across as authentically as it did when we had a conversation last week to the audience. So thank you again for taking the time. So would love for you to share a little bit about your career, and then I'll jump into the questions. Does that sound good?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Thanks so much, Elise. So really quickly, I always tell people that my career has been much more of a jungle gym than that ladder that, our parents and, everybody was fighting for. I've been over here, over there, down here, up there. Like, it's just been all over the place, right? And I think that early on, I made a lot of career choices for what would make the most sense to other people, right? Like, what would my parents think was successful? People are not going to understand digital content producer and all of that. So I was in higher education for a while. I was in the nonprofit world for a while. I was in ed tech for a while. And while a lot of that work was great, it was not my passion. And I was just too scared to jump into my passion, which was entertainment, which was writing and all those things, until I got fired. I got fired from an ed tech job. And it was difficult for a lot of reasons. I had moved to the DMV area for that job. And I cried every day from the first day for 8 months. I cried every day on my way to work. It was so hard. It was like 10, 12-hour days. I'm trying to prove myself. I'm just working as hard as I possibly could. It was a predominantly white space. And I just remember that I felt so small and unsupported when my first boss left. And it almost felt like the powers that be were looking for a reason to fire me, until one day I was fired. And I asked the reason why, and I never got a straight answer. And I took a couple of weeks to grieve that, right? Because no one wants to be fired. No one wants that mark on their record. But then I realized that was an opportunity for me to jump into media in the way that I really wanted to. And so I started taking classes in production. I went to Miami to volunteer for the American Black Film Festival. I became part of the Fame by FindSpark class that, we were learning all about advertising at Gray, advertising in New York City. And I just started doing all these different things to jump into media, and I realized that production was my passion. And I ended up, working now at Essence, where I'm super happy, every day to be working and doing something that I really enjoy in a space that feels safe for me. Yeah.
Well, yes. Well, I mean, thank you again for sharing that story. You are certainly brave, and it's not easy to pull yourself up after being let go or fired, if you will. But sometimes that's a blessing, right? Because then you have an opportunity to explore paths that you might not have otherwise pursued. So now, what you mentioned, creating safe spaces, brave spaces. What do you think a brave space, looks like? What are some of the characteristics of those brave spaces, and how have they helped you in your career?
Yeah, I think that it looks like everyone's seeing each other's humanity. I always tell people that I love to be in spaces where everyone, whether you're E-suite, C-suite, or, mid-level, lower level, whatever, everyone is seeing everyone's humanity, right? You're looked at as a person and not just your output. And so it's like a holistic kind of situation, right? Where, you know, you can ask about someone's family. You know that they may have this health issue and they have to leave at 3 o'clock to go to a doctor's appointment or whatever the case is. And you're not just seen as how hard can you work until you drop? You know what I mean? I think that there's, you know, and especially now we're in this time of like everyone, you know, having to work from, or a lot of people having to work from home. Things have slowed down to some degree for a lot of us. And we're all like reevaluating what is it that we really want in our workplaces and in our work experiences. And I just think that that's one of the most important things that I've noticed for myself. I need to be in a space where everyone is seen as a whole person. And you know, your concerns and your lifestyle or your culture, all of those things come into play, you know, when you're interacting with one another.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not easy to do, right?
Yeah.
Creating a safe and or brave space that's centered around belonging. And, you know, from my experiences, a lot of times, you know, leaders across the organization, you know, feel like it's a one and done.
Yeah.
Like, you know, this is a constant drumbeat, right? To create those safe spaces, get feedback from employees to see what resonates with them and how they define that safe and brave space. So, you know, I hear when you described your experience, you shared a little bit about, you know, you didn't use the word burnt out, but drained.
Yeah.
You know, which, you know, I think we all feel from time to time, especially during these uncertain times. You know, how do you combat that? How do you ensure that you are practicing self-care? As well as supporting others within, you know, within your network and within your workplace. And what is, you know, Essence, you know, doing to provide that support?
Yeah, I really like this question because I think it's so important. A lot of times when we have these conversations, we're thinking about them externally, and it's both, right? It's both, and it's a internal and it's an external thing. And I just think about how I used to never take any of my paid time off. You know what I mean? I would never take my vacation days because I'm like, no, I have to get this done. I don't want to fail. I'd be waking up in the middle of the night. Did I send that email? And now it's just kind of like, I'm going to set these 4 or 5 things that I'm going to get done today. And then I'm going to close my laptop at 5:30 or 6 o'clock. You know what I mean? And like now that I'm working from home, like I close my laptop, I put it in my backpack that I used to use when I trekked into the city. And I zip the backpack up because it's like, I have to close that part of my day. Like I have to, or else I'll just keep getting, you know, caught up. And I'll be answering emails at 10 o'clock and listening to tape at 11 at night. You know what I mean? Like all these different things. And so that's one of the things that I have to compartmentalize my day, because I am not just what I do. And for a long time, I think I was so caught up in finding something to do and something to be a part of that I couldn't practice self-care because I was so caught up in that. And so I think that that's really important. The other thing I think is important is just checking in on one another, even if, you know, your colleagues and everything. I think that it's just important to know how they're doing, especially in this time. You know, we're going through a pandemic, a cultural like shift and revolution and all these different things. There's a lot of heaviness on our hearts, right? There's a lot of things that we're working through, even in our own families, things that have happened in our own families. And so it's just really important to know what people's mental states are, because you know, especially in our team, we're a team of 3 women who are producing 5 podcasts, right? So it's a lot.
Yes, so
we're constantly checking in, like, hey, how you feeling? Do you need me to take this meeting so you can go take lunch because you haven't taken lunch yet and it's 3 o'clock? You know what I mean? And just being aware of one another, I think is just super helpful, especially in these times. And I think at Essence, like our interim CEO now, she's introduced the idea of having a self-compassion plan, where you really sit down and you think through the things that you need in order to be your full self and to be well. And you write down your self-compassion plan and you share it with everybody so that everybody knows what you need and they can check with you. Like, hey, you said you were going to clock out at 5:30. You're still on. You know what I mean? And everyone, it's a communal thing as opposed to, oh, I just got to figure this out for myself, right? I think Quintrell said earlier, like, we're designed, we're hardwired for community, right? And so if that's the case, then we should it should be okay for us to want to help take care of one another, you know?
Yes, I love that, and so important, especially during these times. And you have an accountability partner as well.
Yeah,
right.
For sure.
When you say you choose to log off, or maybe you had an appointment or what have you, but making sure that you're practicing self-care and creating that community of people that really want you to succeed.
Yeah,
is also really important. So I just want to make sure we leave enough time for Emily and the folks that are joining us to ask questions. So in closing, how can companies support Black employees specifically around mental health awareness?
I think
go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
No, really quickly, because I know we gotta like speed along, but really quickly, just one quick story. When in 2014, I was working in higher ed, and that is when Michael Brown was killed. And I remember the day after it happened, and I went into work in a predominantly white space. Myself and only like one of my other coworkers was Black, and I felt so uncomfortable in just trying to have a conversation with her that we were whispering in the corner of the office. And I was almost like hyperventilating because of how much it affected me, right? Like I have a brother, right? Like who's around Michael Brown's age and all these different things. And I think that it's so important for everyone to step out of their own bubbles and to be aware of what's happening in the world and how it's affecting everyone else, right? So even if it's not someone who's of my own group, I'm not a Latina, but I do understand how a lot of the conversations around immigration are affecting that community, right? I check in with my friends of that community. You know what I'm saying? I try to figure out how I can be of assistance to them. You know what I mean? And I think it's just so important when we have any sort of privilege or any sort of power to just make sure that we are thinking holistically, not just about ourselves and our own wellness, but about everyone else around us. The other thing I want to say is, if you are a person, an ally, a white person who has any sort of clout, any sort of higher level position, I think that it is so important for you to show up for the employee resource groups at your company, to be vocal about your support, to make sure that they have a budget, to make sure that they have that support, because those groups are helpful for the different groups of people within your organization to feel that they belong there and that they can make a change there and that they are valued there. And so I think that's another really big thing for me, is like just your word, right? Just you saying, I support this 100%. What can you do? That is a lot. And I don't think that people realize how much that means to have that support from the E-suite and the C-suite. So those are things that I think are just super helpful when it comes to allies and managers and executives and things of that sort.
Absolutely. Speak up.
Yeah.
Show your support for sure. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Ashley. This has been an amazing conversation. I appreciate your vulnerability, compassion, and insight around this topic. And look forward to continuing the conversation after today. So thanks again.
Thank you, Elise.
Thank you. All right, everyone. Well, thank you for staying on. We're going to do a little closing and then bring folks back on for questions. But if we could get a virtual round of applause for all of our speakers, and if you can hang out a little bit longer, we will take some time for questions. We appreciate your energy. We know this has been a long event, but I'm sure you would agree that this has been a lot of great information. So thank you to our speakers. Please connect with them on LinkedIn. All the LinkedIn addresses are on the event page, so you can go there to nab them. I really encourage you all to create some action items based on what you heard today. Conversations are great and they are powerful, and awareness and education is where you have to start, but the next steps have to include action. So I encourage you all to write down some action items for yourself based on where you are and what part you can play in making a better workplace. I also encourage you to join the FindSpark LinkedIn group. We're starting to share more resources there, and also to follow us on Instagram. This is a great way to get updates on our programs and the resources that we create. And if you are an employer or work for a company that wants to connect with diverse talent in meaningful ways, I encourage you to sign up at findspark.com/employers to connect with me to learn more about how we can support your diversity, inclusion, recruitment, and employer branding goals online through educational opportunities, access to our network, and I'd be thrilled to have those conversations and discussions. And we do have an event coming up in August for those of you who are job seeking. We're doing another installment of our 2-part job hunt intensive. So check those out, as well as another way to stay involved. And I've been sharing these 4 keywords at the end of our virtual events during this time. I think these words are all really important in moving forward during this incredibly difficult time because of the global pandemic. We all are facing unique challenges, both at work and at home. So keeping these things in mind and trying to be flexible, empathetic, creative, and resilient, I think will help us all move forward. And now with that, I want to bring some speakers back up, and I'm going to actually bring Ashley back on really quick because I think this would be a great one for her. So if you do have a question, I'm going to try to get through with our speakers. So Ashley, the question we got was, I know this is a supremely complex question, but I'm going for it anyway. What do you think will make the most difference in sustaining the current energy of the movement? And I'm asking you that supremely complex question because I know through your work at Essence and your, I feel like you have the passion for storytelling and that sort of thing. You're really involved in helping continue these conversations happen. So what do you think are some things that you're seeing to help us sustain this effort towards, not letting this just be a trend and a blip?
The main thing that I'm seeing that's sustaining is when white people take the lead. I have seen, and it's so interesting because I've seen former coworkers who would never touch conversations about race or about, togetherness, regarding race. I've seen them have an awakening during this time, and they are at the forefront of these conversations, and they're not putting the onus on, Black and brown people and people of other identities, marginalized identities, but they're like, okay, what can I do? How can I be a part of this conversation? And how can I now lead from my place of privilege or my place of leadership, or, whatever the case is. And I think that to me has been one of the things that I think will be sustaining, for sure.
Great, thank you so much. All right, my next question is for Franklin. And to my speakers, I'm probably going to put 2 of you on camera at once just so we can keep it rolling and move through as many of these as possible. So Franklin, would love to hear an answer. We've got this a few different ways from actually longtime community member Nika. She wants her view on how do you present your workplace as a safe and welcoming place to BIPOC at the moment when it's an overwhelmingly white space to attract and retain more diverse talent. So, for instance, companies that are trying to change the makeup of their communities and be more inclusive, they have to start somewhere. And oftentimes, visually, they might not be in a space that looks like it's diverse and inclusive. So what are your tips for those companies that are making those changes, but, at the current moment, there isn't a lot of representation?
Yeah, so first of all, you have to work with what you have. And if what you have is predominantly white men and women, they are a part of the conversation as well. And so, you can't neglect the fact that it will take a collective to drive change and to reinforce an environment of inclusion, but also expanding the conversation of what inclusive and what inclusion and diversity is, brings them into the conversation. And so, in my opinion, we need to expand the tent so there are more people that are a part of the conversation, but they have to be a part of driving the change as well.
Love that. Thank you so much, Franklin. Quintrell, I'm going to field the next question to you, which is, how can companies improve career development and coaching and mentorship opportunities specifically for Black professionals and people of color in the workplace?
That's a great question. And I think, so all of our organizations are different sizes. We're made up of, they're different sizes. We have different amount of resources. But I think with any sort of problem, you sort of assess the needs. Like, when you talk about us as like a Black population, we all have different career needs. We have different values, different interests. So I think it's important to assess, but also like implement solutions that are sustainable, that are realistic, because you can scale anything and grow it and develop. But I think just start by having the conversation, assessing what folks' needs are. And like we get the most out of being able to get our hands on to grow professionally. So anything where you can get some real experiential opportunity to learn and grow is helpful.
Great. Thank you for answering that. Let's see. We have a lot of great questions, everyone. So thank you for asking them. Let's see, Corinne, I'm going to ask this one to you. What is just a couple of more of your quick tips on how you address, microaggressions and, racist comments or behaviors without putting your job on the line, especially when and if they're coming from executive level leaderships? I know you mentioned a lot of great phrases. I think if you had to sort of distill some of the ones that you found people find most effective, what would you recommend? Oop, you're muted, Corinne. Let's see, got to turn your mic on. There you go.
Conversation with a mentor outside of your office place. I recently had a mentee describe a abuse exchanges with a boss who was exhibiting microaggressive behavior, who was blocking her from going above her, and she talked to me, myself, and a few other people to come up with an effective strategy to skirt the issue. I saw that somebody said, "Can you go to HR?" HR may not be the best place to go, so you might have to look at, when I said assess the company culture, it's whether HR will be open to that, and whether even your colleagues are open to a conversation. But you can say to the person, "I'd like to have a conversation with you about our last exchange," and say, I was uncomfortable with some of the things that we talked about. Can we talk about it?
Great. Thank you. All right. And this next question, I'm going to bring Elise back on. Turn your mic and camera on. So for Elise, when you do get the attention of top executives at your organization, what do you find are some of the best ways to present your thoughts on how they can better improve representing diversity in leadership roles specifically? So recruiting others that can, provide that representation.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is to build the trust with the leadership team, hopefully in advance of these types of conversations, because they can be uncomfortable, and creating that safe space and action-oriented approaches, right, on how to bring more people of color in or Black people into the organization, and to take it a step further, making sure that you have an environment that is inclusive. And is supportive, right? Because we spend a lot of time talking about how to attract and hire underrepresented groups. But I don't think enough conversation and action-oriented approaches are focused on how to retain them and how to celebrate them and promote them and make sure they're given the same access and opportunities to experiences and roles that others within the organization might have. So, part of it is getting that open dialogue, educating them on what the talent pipeline is or is not, because there's a lot of conversation around that. and providing them with conversation starters on how to engage with individuals that might not look like them or might not have gone to the same school that that they went to, because it's not that they don't want to engage with other other organizations or other professional associations, but they might not know how to have that conversation. So creating that safe space to kind of coach them and guide them and be a thought partner through that process to make sure that we're bringing people in to the organization that are from underrepresented groups.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Elise. And next question is for Naya, and then I think we're going to wrap up because everyone got a question and everyone's been so great. We still have over 100 people who have tuned in for this almost 2-hour program, so we're so grateful for everyone's time. Naya, you mentioned like a really interesting program, your DISCO program, which I think it'd be great to type in that acronym again into the chat if you can before you head out. But how have you translated some of these programs that sound really impactful, and fun and not just all serious, but how have you translated some of these programs virtually over the past few months, and what have you, and maybe just share one or two that you think have been the most successful virtually, and maybe one most successful, maybe one least successful that you're still working through.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in terms of successful, again, kind of thinking about the self-care aspect, there are a lot of external vendors that do telemeditations that were doing them before sort of everything happening with COVID. And so one that I work with, and I'll put it in the chat as well, but they're called the Suki Project. And they specifically specialize in thinking about sort of culturally competent self-care and wellness in the workplace specifically. So they're a great organization. We do, I've worked with them at my previous organization and at the one that I'm currently at, so highly recommend them. One that hasn't worked as well, I think is really, we tried to do sort of like a movie discussion, like watching a documentary, and that didn't go as well. I think it's hard to keep people engaged in watching something all at the same time. And so that's something honestly that I'm still working on, but I think finding external vendors that already know how to do this work, and then just making sure that whatever you're doing is engaging. There needs to be something interactive or some sort of conversation starter, something to really get people involved and interested in the topic that you're discussing. And I know we're pressed for time, so if anyone has any questions and kind of wants me to further elaborate, happy to do this on LinkedIn or via email, however.
Thank you so much. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Again, to our 125 people who are still tuning in and have been here throughout the entire event. Thank you for your conversations, your questions, your thoughts, sharing your experiences throughout this program. This has been recorded, and it will be made on demand over the next day or so. We'll send out an email when it's available, and you and friends and colleagues can actually sign up at the same link where you registered to view it on demand once it's available. If you did enjoy this program, one of the best things that you can do to help the FindSpark community grow and be able to produce more conversations, virtual programs, and resources is to just tell a friend. Share our Instagram, share a link, forward an email, sign up on our site, findspark.com, so we can create more resources. Thank you again so much to our speakers for their time and their energy, sharing their stories with us. We really, really appreciate it. And we look forward to hopefully lots of connections being made from this and the conversations continuing far past this event date. So thank you so much, everyone, and we hope to see you at a future event.